And we are live. Welcome, folks, to Friday's episode of the Survival Podcast. Of course, we are doing an Outback with Jack episode, which is just a variety episode. If you're new to the show, usually we called it this Outback with Jack because I did it out on my back porch. We're going to get there again. Right now, it's cold as heck out in the mornings. It's actually beautiful in the afternoons, but it's a bit cold to be out there for an hour and a half to 2 hours doing these live feeds right now. And it's a bit cold to turn off the heat in the house. So the furnace kicks on and then the outdoor unit kicks on and then there's noise in the background. And it's been windy, but we will get to the Outback part of Outback with Jack again soon, but we will stick to all the cool variety. And actually, it's kind of cool in here because I have redundancy with my recording and I have another screen I can look at. So it's actually easier in here, but I do want to get back to the back porch again because I enjoy doing the podcasts out there. And it's about the right time of year to start doing it again. We are going to continue today on what we started on Monday with answering listener questions. 100% of these come from MeWe. And 100% of these come from the MeWe Survival Podcast Hangout group. If you're not on MeWe, you might want to consider getting on there. And if you want to meet really cool people from the TSP community, once you sign up, look me up. I'm Jack Spirko on MeWe. You can find me there. You can find me that on the Get Social page of my website, thesurvivalpodcast.com. And join that group because it's a great way to meet other people that are part of this community. I always hear, how do I find people? How do I find people? Well, they're waiting to meet you. So get on the MeWe group, and then maybe you'll get to be on a show like this. You'll get your question kind of prioritized. Last Monday, I did I think I did 20 or 25, 24, somewhere in that neighborhood range on Monday. And I still had a ton left over. And there were most of them that were left over were in the MeWe group because it's most active. So I jumped on there, and here's what we're going to talk about today. Till versus no-till gardening, basic supplies to make mead, pounds of honey to the gallon with mead, how to build a small garden pond and keep it from becoming a skank tank. That'll be part of my upcoming course, but we'll talk a little bit about it today. David on MeWe asked about filling raised beds when you don't have access to bulk materials. Going from all under the table cash business side hustle to legitimate reporting revenue, tax deduction business, etc. That's something that we're going to talk about today. We talk about that a lot. Aquaculture and USDA Zone 4, it's impossible. No, it's not. Talk about how to do it. And then we're going to talk about keeping aquaponics going in the winter. And the question really is, should you? And the answer is, it depends. So we'll talk about that. How to get young children excited about gardening. It's actually really easy. It's really easy. They want to do what mommy and daddy do. So, monkey see, monkey do is the key there. And then getting them doing one or two things they can see the results of fast. Kelsey asks about spring. Can you start your plants indoors too early? Can you be too early? You jump the gun on starting your plants. Mia wants to know about developing a small spring on a property. And then we're going to talk about using aerobic spray from septic tanks for irrigation purposes safely. And the maelstrom of what's on the internet about you can do it, you can't do it, don't worry about it, it'll kill you. Just ignore it all. I'll give you the answer today to this one, the safe answer that's neither too conservative nor too aggressive. We'll talk about all of that in just a minute. First up, though, I do want to talk about our sponsor today. And our sponsor today is Paul Wheaton at Permies.com. And he has something cool to tell you about. I want to make sure I don't miss any of them. I'm going to bring it up on the screen right now for you guys. So Paul is having a 2022 Permaculture Technology Jamboree. It's going to be June 27th to July 8th. So it's going to be really awesome. There is a ton of stuff going on, 15 event tracks, 20 instructors. Here's just some of what they're going to be doing. They're going to be doing a Sepp Holzer style spring terrace, 400 gallons of water a day from dry land. That'll be interesting. And we have a question about spring development here today. Rocket hot tub. I guess that's what it says. It says HOR, so I'm going to say it's hot. It's supposed to be HOT. Preserve 1 million calories in 6 ways. Build a true round door on a wafati. That's kind of a semi sort of underground earth contact structure Paul invented. Passive solar garden heaters. Growing mycelium insulation panels. Passive solar intensive yurt. Robust apothecary. Build 4 different styles of beehive. A rocket oven with an outdoor kitchen. I'll have a link to this where you can get on this page right here and check this all out for yourself. But they're going to be doing a ton of simultaneous builds, and you can move between these 15 different builds that are all going on simultaneously and learn what you want from each one. And if you want to, you can stack this event with an on-site PDC. So you can stay for the time of just the Jamboree, or you can stay for several weeks and stack a full PDC. And I'm sure any of Paul's PDCs are going to have awesome instructors. I don't know that I'll be able to get, I already have a lot of speaking commitments. I don't know that I'll be able to get up for this one this summer. But man, if you are anywhere near Montana, this is going to be one of the coolest things that you could ever do with your time. And, you know, we talk a lot here about being smart with money. And most of you that have some sort of a side business going or a business of your own, you really, and I mean really, can figure out how to deduct this. There's almost no travel I do anywhere that I go that it doesn't create tax deductions. So we're going to talk about tax deductions and what they can and can't do for you, but just look at how much is going to be going on. I don't know where else you're going to be able to go and learn this much on one trip. Plus, you know what? If you're going to spend time in the mountains of Montana, up near Missoula, which is kind of in the area that Paul's at, the middle of summer is the time to do it, guys. It is just absolutely beautiful. Those of you that live in the South and you've just about had enough of the heat this time of year, that might be reason enough to go alone and consider all of this gravy on the biscuit, so to say. This is going to be awesome. Again, I'll have a link where you can look up all of the stuff that's going on and see if this is right for you. Get your tickets, learn about your instructors, tons of high quality people here to learn from. And I guarantee you the networking that you're going to be able to do here must be awesome. By the way, check Paul out there in the center of the screen right now, the dude next to him. I don't know who that dude next to him is that looks short. That dude's tall. Paul Wheaton is a freaking giant. Go get your picture taken with Paul Wheaton the giant and meet all these cool people. You can check it out again. The links will be in the show notes today. So thank you, Paul, for sponsoring TSPC and for doing so many awesome things in the world of permaculture. Farm Boy asked what the website again is. I guess you're asking about that. I have a link, and it's actually at Wheaton-Labs, and it's long. So it will be in the audio version that goes up about an hour after this podcast live stream ends. But overall, the sponsor here is Permies.com, Permies.com. I will put it there for you, but he has different things on different URLs. So that's the main website. That's where you can find the forums and connect with Paul's community. So check it out if you can. Remember, while I'm going through all of your questions today, if you have anything you want me to comment on or answer, I can't do them all. I have to limit how much time I spend on the air for these live streams. I've been on the air with live streams before, like did a back porch one with Bloody Marys, 4.5 hours. It was fun, but I can't do that every day. But if you do all caps, I will hit a little star indicator, and at the end, I'll come back and answer some of those. So that's kind of how you ask a question and put your hand up at the same time. With that, let's dig into this. John Bob on MeWe says, should you till a garden or just sow or what? Just direct sow or what? It depends. So my raised bed gardens are now in their third year. The big ones that I do my main crops in, I will not till them. They've never been tilled except when they were installed, but they're raised beds and they're about 30 inches high. They have excellent fill. They have been cover cropped every winter. They get mulched every winter. And what will happen when I haven't even planted this year yet. What's going to happen, hopefully this weekend, we'll start getting the initial spring planting in. I'm going to pull mulch back. I'm going to hit them with Dr. Earth fertilizer and some other components of my fertility program. I'll push the mulch back over. I'll add a fresh layer of mulch, and I'll plant. And if you are in a situation where you don't have I have some little bits of grass coming up. I mulched with straw this year, so I do have a few places where some of the seed there's always some residual seed, so it looks like wheat of some sort growing. But it's really easy to pull out because the soil is friable. In that instance, no, I wouldn't till. The only reason I would till is because you haven't taken care of your soil, and you need to loosen your soil, and you have a lot of weeds that need to be removed. Now, here's the thing about tilling. Tilling makes weeds. So if you're going to till and you want to get to a point where you can stop tilling, which should be your goal, in my opinion, then when we till, we have to look at it like earth surgery. We have taken the patient, we've knocked him out, we put him on the table, we cracked his chest open, put the rib spreader in, and replaced the heart valves. Think about it being that radical. And if we start thinking about tilling being that radical, we're going to be really careful where and when we use it. If I got a guy that has 3 heart valves that are failing and he needs a triple bypass, we're probably going to do heart surgery. But we're not going to do it every year because, well, that's just what you do. See, that's how we want to think about tilling. So if we're going to till, in my opinion, we need to till with the goal to be, this shall be the last time that we till. So when we till and we plant, we need to go with a good organic fertility program at that point. Compost, organic fertilizer, mineral supplements, whatever we want to do, a good mulch, good clean mulch. And we want to, that season, see it as our highest duty in that garden space that we've tilled to weed like we've never weeded before. We need, because we're going to open up a seed bank of weeds. That's what happens when we till. So to understand this, this is how you would understand it. If I take a random place that's not completely desolate and dead, that hasn't been sanitized with some sort of complete eradication of all life, and I go out to a place and I take a square foot and I till it really deep and loose, and then I take another spot next to it, about another square foot, and I compact the ground. I get one of those tampers and I tamp it down as hard as I can. And I take another square foot and somehow I create a border and I burn all the vegetation for a square foot. And then I take another square foot and I take something like a spike and I just put spike holes into the ground about every inch across. So I make, a 12 inch squared, 1 inch by inch poke in the ground, and I water into those holes. All 4 of those patches, you're going to see different weeds come up. Each one of those actions is what we call a disturbance, but it's also what's called the germination trigger. So when we till, we're going to take and we're going to disturb the soil and we're going to churn up the millions of seeds that are in any patch of ground the size of a garden. Yes, I said millions. And some of them are going to go, it is my time. And they are going to erupt. And it's probably going to be that our plants will grow, that we plant really, really well as well. So we become convinced that tilling works. Well, what it does is it kills a lot of soil life. And when they give their life and expend their life, they contribute to the growth cycle. But if we're constantly killing the soil organisms, we're depleting the battery instead of charging the battery. So we're only going to do this once. And then we are going to be religious that season with mulch and weeding. Because if we look at weeds when they come up and we freshly tilled soil and they're about that big, they're a couple inches high, we take 2 fingers. We don't need any kind of equipment. We just go, pluck, and it comes out. And if we do that for a season and we maintain our soil health for a full season, that act of surgery on the ground can be highly beneficial for years to come. And then we need to go into a program of either sheet mulching and tarping or sheet mulching and cover cropping at the end of every season if we don't garden through our winter, which I don't. We could here, but it's borderline, and I don't want to do the extra steps I have to do it. So if you do that, then in the future, all you do is pull back mulch, dig a hole, drop your plants in, or pull back mulch, cut a furrow, drop your seeds in, cover your furrow, leave your mulch back. When your stuff comes up, push your mulch around your plants. And that's what you're going to do going forward. So tilling, to me, for your garden, it's a once and done. Now, what if you're not bad enough to need to till, but you have problems? You have compaction, you need to loosen the soil, you need kind of a reboot. Then I would use either a broad fork, which you can look up what those are, but they're specialized, and unless you're going to use it a lot and you're like doing a market garden, you probably don't need one. So what I would use then is just a simple pitchfork, push it into your ground, rock it back and forth, go a few inches forward, do it again, do it all the way through your garden. And this is probably better than tilling. Pull all your weeds, all of your obstructions, things like that, get it out, then treat it like you tilled it. It will probably have less issues if you do that, if that will work for you. All right. Now, before we go on, one thing you really need to understand about why tilling is such a bad idea. Your average like rototiller that you use, your garden rototiller, spins, Troy-Bilt, what have you, DR, etc. They're going to go down about 4 inches, and they're going to really loosen up and make that top 4 inches of soil great. But right where they hit at the bottom, they actually compact soil. So you make this beautiful 4-inch top level, and you compact the layer beneath it. And especially if you have clay soils, now you've compacted clay like a pond, and that's what's going to happen. Your water is going to actually fill up in your garden. Wonderful. No, too much water. You have all kinds of problems when you have too wet of soil, and you also then create a situation where if it's not too wet, it sheds off to the side and it stays dry and it becomes impermeable about 4 inches down, and you can never develop a deep root system. Now, will this always happen? Depends. If you mostly have a sandy soil, you're only going to compact so much, and the plant roots themselves will break into it. If you have clay in your soil, it's absolutely going to happen, and I really don't advise it. Next up, what are the basic supplies for mead making and pounds of honey to the gallon? I think the guy asked me, how much mead can I make with 5 pounds of honey? It depends. What do you want to make? So my general formula for making mead, but depending on how high I want the alcohol and how much residual honey flavor I want to leave behind, is 2.5 to 3 pounds to a gallon. All right. So and I usually use 3 pounds to the gallon. That's mostly what I do when I'm trying to make a good kind of general mead. And then I am a big believer in yeast nutrient. If you are making a straight honey mead, that means no adjuncts at all. Or if you're making a kind of a straight methylogen. A methylogen is where you're doing something like an herbal. It is an herbal mead, but like I was trying to think of an example. I've done a peppermint and thyme. Believe it or not, peppermint and thyme mint, and actually was really, really interesting. Or if you're using, like you're doing a pepper mead and you're making it spicy, you're not using a lot of peppers because there's only going to be so much nutrient in the peppers then. So I that's what I recommend, is that you use a yeast nutrient. I personally use 2 yeast when I make my mead. I like my mead very dry, and I use I can't even think. Pasteur Blanc is one of them, and then there's another yeast that I use when I make meads. I have them written up on my website. I will add them to the show notes today. I just want to make sure I don't forget. So yeast, I meant to say yeast, but I'll know what it means. Yeah, so you want to have a yeast nutrient if you're doing a herbal or a light adjunct mead or a straight honey mead. If you are not going to do that, if you're going to do something like a cherry mead or a strawberry mead or anything that uses a fruit or any vegetable, like why would you use vegetables? Cucumber, mint, try that. You'll see why. It's amazing. If you have any kind of thing like that going into your mead, you don't need a yeast nutrient. There's enough nutrient with that vegetable or that fruit. And I guess cucumber is technically a fruit, but we usually think of it as vegetable, that you will be able to just not worry. You can just forget about it, move on with your life, and not worry about it. And then you need good, clean water. And I am a big fan of making 1 gallon batches of mead at this point. And you can go to my site and search for small batch mead. You can find entire shows, and I will link to a couple of the best ones in the show notes today as well for small batch mead. But I make mead in 1 gallon jugs like apple juice comes in or something like that. And then you're going to need an airlock. And why not? So something like this right here. You're going to need a little airlock. You'll have a little cork that goes into the bottle. And what I do is I just take a drill bit. I use a step bit or a unit bit, call it what you want to. And I drill into the cap on the bottle and shove the cork into it and add a little bit of water to the airlock, and bazinga, bazanga, you let it do its thing and you have mead. I'm not going to go into how to make mead. I just want to say that's like the basic ingredients and stuff that you need. I would also get a small racking cane. I'll put that in the notes as well. A little small racking cane to siphon your mead wort, for lack of a better term, or must out, and then to do a secondary fermentation. I have a whole way that I do this, guys, but explaining it right now would be redundant. I'm just going to put a link for you, but that's all you need. Now, I do want to talk about the amount of honey to the gallon and why it's not as hard and fast as people seem to think. Like it's got to be 3 pounds or whatever. You can go up to 4. And if you use the yeast combination I use, which is Premier Blanc and Cuvée. Cuvée is the other yeast. Somebody put it in the chat for us. You will not end up with an overly sweet mead, and you will end up with a very, very high alcohol mead. You'll end up with something that is somewhere in the 17% alcohol by volume, and it will age beautifully, and it will have more honey character. But we don't always have to blow it out. I have made some incredible meads at about 1.5 pounds to the gallon, and I would call that a session mead. It's something you can drink far more like water than you would. I'm trying to find a question somebody asked here. I don't know. I thought somebody asked about ethanol. Don't worry about ethanol in mead. You can make a mead like that. I made a raspberry ginger mead. I made a 5-gallon batch at 1.5 pounds per gallon. And you say, well, the raspberries throw. Well, first of all, raspberries don't throw much sugar to begin with. But I used actually the little concentrated raspberry sweet flavor that they sell you for beer kits, like the amount you use for a 5-gallon batch of beer to make like a raspberry stout. I just dumped one of those in, and I put in, I think per gallon, I did 2 ounces of fresh ginger. So I made a raspberry ginger sparkling mead that I put in the keezer. Everybody loved it. And you could drink 3 glasses of it without ending up on the floor drooling and not remembering your name. So we can go to the lighter side, but if you're going to the lighter side with mead on the amount of honey, then we need to do something for flavor and effervescence. And I think you could take that down to 1 pound to the gallon. 1 pound to the gallon is going to give you about a 4% mead. And a 4% mead is, it's kind of like a little bit more than your average light beer and a little bit less than your average full body beer. You're going like 5% on like a full body beer and like 4%. So you're right in between there. And that's a much better product if you're going to have more than a couple glasses. The warning on this, light meads go down really easy. It's still an alcoholic beverage, guys, and it will tear you up if you let it. So don't do it. Next, how to build a small garden pond and keep it from killing fish or going skanky. So here's a concept just to think about. Small is a relative term. This person says 100 to 200 gallons. This is not even hard. I'm actually about to build an in the ground in a raised bed. So the ground is actually raised up 30 inches, but into one of my raised beds, a 15-gallon pond. And I'm going to use the heavy rubber feed tubs that you can buy at like Tractor Supply to put this pond in. And so that's a challenge. If you want to do 100 gallons, I guess there's a lot of ways you could do it. Let me give you 2 ways you could do it. One is you could dig out the contours of the hole you want, drop in a rubber pond liner. And at this scale, I would say like, you don't even need to go to pondliners.com and buy like the 45 mil super heavy duty one. A pond of that size would probably be fine with an off the shelf, pre-sized, 10 by 10 or 10 by 8 liner from Home Depot or Lowe's. Just run a calculation. You can go to pondliners.com and they have calculators there too to calculate like volume and size and depth and how big a liner you need. And you can buy the expensive liner if you want, but this is kind of experimental. I would just use a less expensive off-the-shelf liner. I think those are usually 0.2 or 0.25 mil, and that will probably be fine. You can do it with a tractor tire, right? So a big tractor tire. We won't get into that today, but you can look up tire ponds and see how to do that. A real simple, easy way. Get a 100-gallon Rubbermaid stock tank. They're about 2 foot deep. They're a little over 4 foot long, though, and they're more than 2 foot wide. So I don't know if you want to go that big on the surface area and depth, but you would just drop that into the ground so that the top was level with kind of your surface and maybe hide it in with some rocks. Now you got a pond. Now, how do we keep it from going skanky? Well, Doing it with no aeration of any kind is going to be difficult. And I do not recommend it. I do not recommend it. What I will tell you is a pond of that size is absolutely fine with nothing but an aerator. So like a standard aquarium pump aerator. And what you're going to need to do, though, is somehow protect it without baking it in the heat. So we need to put it in some sort of place where it stays dry and it doesn't get water into it. And if we can run power, we're golden. And I would, on a pond that size, before I would use a mechanical recirculating pump, I would use an aerator. I would put it right in the middle, and then I would go ahead. I'm going to put another set of notes up here for myself so I don't forget this. I would use a sponge filter, and I would put that sponge filter all the way at the bottom, and I would get aquarium tubing, and I'm going to tell you where to get your sponge filters in just a second. It'll come with a piece of aquarium tubing about 4 inches tall. I would put that thing all the way at the bottom, maybe put one brick and bring just a couple inches off the bottom. And I would get some aquarium tubing. I would bring that tubing all the way slightly above the surface. And you're going to put a air stone inside the sponge filter. And the filters I'm going to recommend for you have a way to do that that's designed into them. And then you're going to run that tubing all the way to the surface. And when you push air into that sponge filter, and the air goes up the tubing, what it does is it draws water through the sponge filter, and it moves water up the column. If air is moving, the water has to go with it. It displaces the water. And it will actually like percolate. It will look like a percolating coffee maker at the top, and it will percolate water out of the top of that tube. 100 gallons, not even a challenge. That's all you'll need. Now, what are you going to grow in your little pond? You're not going to grow catfish. Maybe stone cats or something like that if you have those around. I would do that just for bait. That would be cool as shit. But what you're going to grow in there is you're going to put something in there like Gambrusia, which are your mosquito fish so that you control mosquitoes, or you're going to put in goldfish. Or you're going to put in something that's a hardy outdoor, normally thought of as a tropical fish like cloud minnows. What are they called? White clouds. White cloud minnows. They'll live outdoors in most of the climates as well. You're going to put some small species in there. If you want to do neocardania, which are the tropical shrimp that aren't tropical that I keep outside and it freezes over every year and they keep living, you don't want to do goldfish. Goldfish will eat them, and you'll be good. You'll be good to go. Now, I want to show you something. I have been working on something for the aquatics course that's coming out, and I bought something to test it. And after I ordered it, and it already shipped, and I didn't want to be a jerk and return it because it wasn't that expensive in the first place, I realized that I made a probably an error in buying this. This is a little bitty aquarium pump, for those that can see it, those that are on audio, and it has an integrated solar panel on it. It works perfectly so far in my testing. It has some rechargeable AA's in it, meaning that when those rechargeable AA's wear out, you take the cover off, throw them away, put new batteries in it. You can go on forever. So if it works, if it produces adequate air, if it really does charge up solarly and it runs overnight on the battery power on a sunny day and then picks up again, what's the problem? The problem is these pumps, when they get wet, they corrode and they rot and they die. And the reason I decided to try something like this is because the air pumps I recommend for fishermen, the Bubble Box, it runs on 2D batteries for like 48 hours, just off the shelf, non-rechargeable D batteries. And that's the claim. And it beats its own claim. It beats its own claim. But in using them, I've determined when they get wet, they die, and they die quick. Well, all the bad reviews on this thing on Amazon say that it dies quick if it gets wet, and I don't doubt it. So my thought was to take the cover off and to seal all the places that water could get into it with GE number 2 silicone, which is fish safe and people safe and things like that. There's a problem. For air to come out, air has to get in. And there is an out on the front side of it. There is an outlet. That's where the water that comes out. And you can hear, I don't know if you guys can hear that or not, but it runs just fine. And then there's an on-off switch right here. And then right in the center, you see the little thing in the center. That's a breather valve. That's so air can get in. So if we put this in some sort of, airtight case, it can't suck air in. So we need airflow. But the other thing we need sunlight on the box itself. So if we put some sort of clear covering over it, we're going to bake this and it's going to die. So there are other ones that I'm going to trial and find the best one I can for these small ponds if you can't run power to the location. And the place I'm going to do it, I can run power. So I should just do that, but I'm doing this for you guys. But I have a plan and it might work. This is my plan. I have trellises where the pond's going to go, where I can put this thing up and point it at the sun and you'll get a great charge. If I point it this way with the top at the top, which is what most people would do because that's how the clip on the back is, it's going to fill up with water. When it gets rained on here, it's going to corrode and it's going to die. What I'm going to do is pop that clip off the back, flip it upside down like that, and I'm going to do the GE number 2 silicon and silicon all the places except the breather valve and point that at the sun and see how it does. And we'll see how that works. And if that works, then I'll be able to recommend this one. However, like I've said, there are some other ones that basically have the pump and they have the panel separately and the wire runs from the panel to the pump. Now, whether they're powered with off-the-shelf rechargeable batteries, that I haven't determined yet, but I'm going to order another one to trial this weekend. And that way we can actually put the box somewhere where it's shaded, the pump somewhere shaded and protected, and the panel somewhere in the sun, which I should have thought ahead about. But I'll say one thing about this. It does work, and boy, is this awesome for fishing, for keeping your minnows alive, because you set up, and unless you're fishing in the rain, you just point this at the sun, and this never, ever, ever will run out of batteries until you wear out the batteries. So a little longer on that one than I wanted, but I'm kind of excited about this idea, and I do want to teach small ponds, 15 to 100 gallons garden ponds. And the other things we want to do, we want shade, we want cover, we want top vegetation. But I'm going to save, this is why I'm putting so much effort into building this course. I can't go that deep into something like this in a variety show. It's not possible. Next up, let's talk about filling raised beds. So this person, David on MeWe, says, I have some raised beds I just built. I need to fill them up with material. Problem is, I don't have a materials place where I can order in a couple of yards or 4 or 6 yards of material. Okay, first thing I'm going to say, David, before you say that, I want you to look harder. I want you to be sure you have to buy material in bags before you do it, because it's going to be a lot more expensive. And a lot of times what people mean when they say, well, I don't have any, bulk material places, is I've looked around a little bit and I haven't found any. I'm going to encourage you to check on Craigslist. I'm going to encourage you to get on Craigslist and put up an ad saying wanted garden bed fill. You might find somebody in the area that has what you're looking for. Maybe, maybe not. So at least try a little harder first so we don't go with the expense. But what I'm going to tell you to do, if you're going to have to bite the bullet and go to the store and buy bags of fill for your garden, then I suggest you get on the Square Foot Gardening website. And I already have a link for this in the audio notes, which again will be up about an hour after this ends. And I want you to use what's called Mel's Mix, which is a mix of peat moss, some vermiculite, compost, and some other stuff. This is going to cost you even more money than just going out and buying big bags of like garden soil or potting soil and dumping it in, right? It's going to cost, but it's not going to be that much more. It's going to cost a little more than just buying a pre-mixed soil and dumping it in. And this is why I want you to do that. If you're going to spend that much money, you want to get a maximum ROI. And if you do the Mel's Mix, the only thing you will add year to year is whatever you use for fertility. And as your level in your garden settles, you're going to add fresh compost and mulch. And you're never going to have to do it again. And 7-8 years into it, you're still going to stick your hand into the bed down to your freaking, your forearm or maybe your elbow by then into your subsoil. Now, there's another thing I want you to consider, though. Do you have dirt you can take from somewhere? Most people that have property of any significant size probably do. Maybe there's somewhere that's a low-lying area that you might want to put in a small pond. You'd be surprised how much dirt comes out of a hole that doesn't look that big. Maybe there's some place that's built up that you want to level off or what have you. So make sure there's not some availability of soil around you, and then incorporate amendments and improve it. That will cost less. Talk to your friends and neighbors. Do they have a place they want leveled? You know, do they have a hole they want dug where you're not going to dig all orange clay out of it or something? Like, is there some place you can go and do work for somebody and get fill? The reason I'm saying this, if you're putting in 1 4x8 or even 2 4x8 beds, it's not that expensive, but it's expensive. You'll have more in the fill, right? You'll have more in the fill than you do in the lumber, even with today's prices. You'd be surprised at how much it takes to fill them up. Then there's another option. Let's say we build our raised beds to be a 6-inch deep raised bed. You can fill them 3 inches. There's subsoil down there. That subsoil is going to get developed too. You can do a 3-inch fill and then do maybe an inch of mulch, and then keep adding organic matter and building it up over time if you don't want to go all out of pocket at that. But if you're going to go and buy bags, I would follow exactly what Mel Bartholomew says to do with square foot gardening, even if you don't do square foot gardening. And I think square foot gardening is a great entry drug for gardeners, but I think it's a little bit overly optimistic with what you can fit in a square foot, and it's not what I do. And I played with it, and I liked it, but I didn't like it enough to keep it. But the mix, the soil mix, is going to do very, very well for you. And I will add one thing to it. Per bed, I would get a bag of green sand, which is an oceanic sand mineral element, and I would spread that out almost like it's fertilizer, the entire bag per 4x8 raised bed, because your mineral increase in doing that. Or, you know, something like rock dust or something, you could use that either or both. All right, next up, let's move on. Daniel on MeWe says, when do you go from under the table all cash side hustle to a business with reported income? That's not how he said it, but that's what he's really asking. So let's talk about that. So basically he's saying, I'm getting to a point where I'm making some money with what I do. I'm spending more money than I'm getting out. So I would be losing money on paper. So maybe I should go, you know, above board with the reporting so I can get the tax deductions. Maybe, but probably not in this situation. And you'd have to go through this one by one, Daniel, and see what really is going to be deductible. But some of the things that Daniel said, and I don't remember what they were. I just remember going, not deductible, not deductible, not deductible. That you're spending to build infrastructure are not deductible. They may be deductible as a depreciation expense, and some of them may be small enough to depreciate all in 1 year. And you can talk to you're going to have to talk to an accountant to make that determination. But basically, one of the things you have to look at, if you buy a thing for your business and then you have the thing, okay, and you get to keep the thing, and at the end of the season, you still have the thing and you can still use the thing. The thing is now not an expense. It's an asset. And assets are not expenses. They're assets. Now, an asset acquired in the business has a life expectancy, and then we can depreciate the asset over time. So we can amortize the expense over time. So if we were doing a market garden, for instance, and we put in a bunch of raised beds, which is probably not the smart way to do a market garden, right? If we're talking about putting lumber in and we're building and filling raised beds like we just talked about, very expensive. We're going to do a market garden. We want a place where we can just grow in the ground. If we need raised beds, we need a different piece of ground to do this, or we need to be doing something beyond a market garden, plant propagation or something. It's much more profitable per square foot. So, but if we did that, said, damn it, Jack, I don't care. I'm going to go out and buy freaking 2x12s and I'm going to put in garden beds or whatever. Okay, go ahead. And so you buy screws, lumber, and fill. Now you spend $5,000 to do that. You put a pretty big operation in. And that includes pipes and irrigation and all that stuff. You spend $5,000 establishing that beachhead for your business. Okay, first of all, you can't expense one dime of it until you sell something. Right? You can't expense you can't deduct anything until you actually have some revenue. And this is going to go on a Schedule F for farm income. Okay. So you have to have some revenue to report to expense anything. But that $5,000 is not an expense. It's infrastructure on your farm, even though it's a garden, it's a farm in the eyes of the government when you're deducting on it. So now you're going to have to depreciate that $5,000, and it might not be like a straight 5-year depreciation like a vehicle. It might be a much longer depreciation. It might be 30 years of depreciation, believe it or not. Now, if you're under a certain amount per individual component, you can do accelerated depreciation. Again, that's an accountant question, but it's not an expense. The other side of this is something like your seed is an expense. You plant it, it's gone. Your fertilizer is an expense. Those are expenses in this type of business. Okay. Now, there's also the agorist in me that says, if you're making money doing a thing, and you can only lose money doing a thing for so long before maybe you should stop doing the thing. So if we're going to actually be profitable with the thing, and we have a full-time income elsewhere. So when I need credit, when I need to buy a house, when I need to buy a car, when I need to prove that I can sustain my life through my own income, I have a source of income to do that with. And I'm making $5,000, $10,000 a year in ice cream money, right? Ice cream money goes back to a guy I knew when I was a kid, friend of my dad's, ran an ice cream shop. And he reported all the income from his ice cream shop. And he sold used cars out of the back. He sold all kinds of extra shit to his customers. Like ice cream shop that sells used cars. Real story. Coal region of Pennsylvania. That was cash money. That was cash money. That's how that worked. Like the cars got sold for a couple $300 on paper. And these were like junker cars. But I mean, they were cars that sold for like a couple $1,000. And there was a lot of other things this guy did, cash money. And he didn't report any of that because he had a legitimate business, right? I talk about this with agorism all the time in status jiu-jitsu. There's a point where you're making so little on it and it's so easy to hide and you have a way to justify it also. Maybe you just, I'm not giving, the advice to break the law or nothing. I'm just saying that maybe that person might choose to just forget that they did it. So when you take a business into full time as one, you have revenue that you need to report so you can do other things in your life. 2, you have a significant amount of revenue and you can't do anything with the proceeds if you try to hide it, right? 3, you have other reasons, right? But here's my thing. I get emails from people that basically they're selling some eggs and some fruit and some stuff like that. They're making a couple $1,000s a year and they want to know what kind of business structure to have. You need a Nunya Corp. A Nunya Corp. Nunya Business Corporation, right? When you're talking that kind of like hobbyist income, and you only are going to report income that you can say you lost money generating for a tax deduction if you have a legitimate path to profitability. Because the government is going to say this about your hobby income, right? You can lose money for 4 or 5 years. After that, you have to report the revenue and you don't get to take the expenses anymore if you haven't made a profit. You need to make a profit once every 5 years. So that's as much as I can do on that one. But really think about this before you rush into having a business. And as John Pugliano explained yesterday, in many instances, even if you have a business, you want to take the expenses. You don't need a structure. It's called a sole proprietorship. If you want to completely cover your bases, go down and file locally what's called a DBA form with your county office, and you're doing business as Jack's Orchard or whatever. You don't need a corporation and you don't need the added requirements of these things for these small entities until you're approaching something along the lines of a full income from an enterprise. Unless you have another reason, like holding property in an LLP to keep the property from being taken in a lawsuit. Unless you know why you're doing it, if you're doing some sort of side business making $5 to $10 grand, forget you did it if that's possible, or if you're going to report it, just do a sole proprietorship on it. It's not worth the added headaches of having to make extra filings and stuff like that. If you don't know, you probably if you don't know that I should do a corporation now, you probably shouldn't. All right. Next up, can you do aquaculture in USDA Zone 4? And if so, how? That's from HBG on MeWe, HBG Raw on MeWe. Yeah. You know who does aquaculture in Zone 4? Ben Falk. Ben Falk has 2 relatively small ponds. They're like long canal-shaped ponds. He's in zone 4, and he's in like cold zone 4. He's in Vermont, and he's in southern Vermont, but he's in a place called the Mad River Valley. It's kind of a microclimate. It gets freaking cold. Like there are parts of Alaska that are literally warmer than where Ben lives in Vermont. So I emailed him as I'm putting this course together because I know it's going to freeze solid all the way to the bottom. I said, Ben, how deep are your ponds? He said, one's about 5 foot, one's about 7 foot. So now they are fairly large ponds. They're not huge. They're basically, you can easily throw a rock across them on the short distance, and they're probably, trying to remember, 150 feet at the most long, somewhere in that range, and they don't freeze solid. Generally speaking, where's your frost line in your soil? If you're deeper than that, you're not going to freeze all the way through. And we don't have to have the whole pond be that deep. We can have what we call kettles, deep zones. Again, I'm going to cover this all in my course. So the issue with aquaculture in cold climates is to have deep enough pond systems that you can overwinter your plants and or animals. And when everything defrosts in the spring, you can keep going and you can get it going again. Now, this is all good and well as long as the pond's in the ground. And again, the pond can be above grade in some form or configuration, as long as we're in the ground. And I would say most of the United States, maybe not zone 4 and below, but most of the United States, 2 feet in the ground, it is not going to freeze solid. 2 feet. The average pond put in by pond builders who build koi ponds and stuff like that, I've done the research. Over 90% of the country is 2 foot of depth, and they never freeze solid all the way to the bottom. But if you're going to emulate what I do, where you have these tanks and small pond systems, call it what you want, that are elevated above grade, and we're pumping water from them into them and back down to the main pond, then what we're going to need to do, especially in that cold of a climate, we're going to need to drain those end their lines and shut them down for the winter and just leave our main pond. And then when we get melt off, we can start that back up and get it going again. So your above grade tanks are going to have to be seasonal, or you're just not going to be able to pull it off because you're going to have an incredible expense on heating and things like that. However, there's also some other things we could do. And I don't think this is going to work with zone 4, but I know it'll work here because we almost don't need it at all. For instance, my 8x16 low Miyagi duck pond system that's behind my duck house. What I'm doing this year is I'm developing a temporary greenhouse, easy install, easy uninstall for it. And it's basically going to be taking some pipes and strapping to, since you have a wood frame, it's real easy. 4x4s, strap some steel straps into the side of the wood and take PVC and put arches. And it doesn't have to even be very high. And then good quality greenhouse fabric and put it over that pond, and then put some 1x boards so that when it's hot enough out, when you get a warm winter day, you can roll them up and clamp them and let airflow underneath. That's going to heat the main pond. And with my system, I'll be able, because I can almost, with no supplemental heat already, and all but the coldest snaps, keep my upper tanks running. With that, I think I'm going to have plenty of heat into the main, the 1,100 gallon pond is going to be getting plenty of warmth, but you are going to lose. Like when you circulate water up into these upper systems, you're going to have heat loss there. So that's one way we can do it. I'm going to go to the next question, though, because it's similar. It's the same but different. Stimpy said, how do you keep aquaponics going in the winter? So if we can put everything in a greenhouse, we're in pretty good shape. Here's another thing that I'm thinking about trying. As you guys have seen, I've started to do these Johnson Sioux-like bioreactor-like compost systems. And they're about 3 foot tall, 6 foot in diameter, holes in the middle. They get up to 140 degrees about 4 or 5 days after you start one. And what I'm thinking about doing is getting some tubing like you would do a thermal siphon with. But a thermal siphon's not going to work here. Okay? And a little pump, like a little 400 gallon per hour pump, put that in the pond, connect it to that tubing, throttle it back so it's just running really slow, and run a coil of tubing through one of those and then drop that back into the pond. And somebody's saying run PEX. Well, you can run PEX if you want to, but with that water circulating through it, it's not going to freeze anyway. But why not PEX, right? But big, huge, long coil, push that water through there, transfer that heat, and you just have this trickle of very, very hot water coming back into that pond. And if you start to get the pond temperature up beyond what you want it to be, shut the pump off. And you set it so that gravity, if you turn the pump off, will drop the water back through the pump. And then you can just build a new compost pile about once a month. You should be able to keep it going there. I'm going to play with both because it may not be necessary to deal with the greenhouse fabric in my client or my climate. With aquaponics, if you are in anything other than like the subtropics, like zone 9 up, you're going to need a greenhouse to keep, or you're going to have to do it indoors to keep it running. But these are hacks that you can do to improve that, right? Because even if we keep the water running, if we get down to 20 degrees, most plants are going to die. So what are we growing if we're not in a greenhouse? But there's a lot of things we can do now. If we have a greenhouse that encompasses the aquaponics or aquatics operation in total, well, those little compost piles, if we leave room for those, make one a month. Just leave it indoors. Just leave it completely inside the greenhouse, and you're going to have, and I'm telling you guys, when I go out and it's a cold morning, the pipe holes in those things, you just see steam rising up out of them. And so you're going to be in a really good situation with that as well. And then for you guys that are going to put in small ponds, look into a company called Springhouse. They make these Springhouse greenhouses, and they make some pretty large ones. Some of you guys with some smaller ponds, you can literally take your Springhouse greenhouse and just put it over your pond. And then they have vents and all that stuff in them. You just unzip the vent on hot days and stuff. And then when your spring comes, just put your Springhouse away or move it and use it for something else. Because you can literally, even the biggest ones they make, 2 people can just pick one up and move it. It's basically elastic type, like the poles you use to make a dome tent is basically how they're made. Now, I've had 2 of them die on me during ice storms. So if you get I get more ice than snow. So what I'm going to advise anybody that uses a Springhouse greenhouse is to put some additional rigidity into propping it up. And if you get ice and snow events, you need to go out and push the ice and snow off the places where it sags, because what happens is the greenhouse fabric that company uses is amazing. It doesn't fail. It never fails. It's the poles crack and they're fiberglass. And when fiberglass breaks, it breaks sharp. And then it pokes holes through the heavily weighted fabric that comes down. So you'd want to do something to kind of build up the strength of the center, mainly of that greenhouse, which might be something like some cinder blocks so it stays out, and just a piece of 4x4 up in the center to keep that from sagging. And you're probably going to get enough fall off every day when the sun comes out. There's a lot of ways to do this. We'll be going into it a lot more in the aquatics course, which is being built as we speak. Or I guess it's not, because I'm here doing this because I'm doing all the work, right? But yeah, it is ongoing right now. Next, how do you get young children excited about gardening? I think the biggest thing that you do is when you're working in your garden, take your kids with you. I understand that doing anything with kids takes more time, more energy, and more effort. It just does. Because you want it done right, and certain things like planting certain things and all, if it's done wrong, plant's going to die. So then you got to redo what the kid does and all, but just take them with you. And even if they're not directly interested, do your planting, do your weeding, do your harvesting, do your stuff, and have the kids with you, like right next to you. Like if they want to look at their Barbie doll or their whatever, fine. But get them out there with you, because when they see a parent or a grandparent doing a thing, well, they want to do it too. That's the number one thing. Number 2 is get them picking food. Anything that you can get them to eat, get them to pick it first. And you might find things they normally wouldn't eat. If they pick it, they'll eat it. So when they start eating food out of the garden, they realize what they're doing. It's very, very empowering. Like I said, growing your own food is an act of sedition, because self-reliance is an act of sedition, because government wants dependency. Oh, by the way, good moment to pimp my shirt today from John Willis. New one just came at me from SOE Tactical Gear. For those who can't see, it's an American flag, an AR, and it says, "Give me liberty, or I'll get it myself." That's right, guys. Give me liberty or I'll get it myself. But yeah, get the kids out there and then get them growing a few things that grow really, really fast, even if they don't eat them. Just so they can see it happen. Radishes are like 28 days, baby greens, things like that. Get them to plant cool things. It's not necessarily edible, but really cool, like awesome looking sunflower and stuff like Mexican sunflower, bright, like there's a wine colored, like a Merlot sunflower, something like that. They grow really fast. And that way, because kids are not about delayed gratification at all. So if we can get some things that grow in 2 to 3 weeks, at least get impressive in 2 to 3 weeks, that gets them excited. And just like something David here says, let a child start a seed in a solo cup and let them be responsible. They'll be hooked forever. One of the first things I ever grew in my little life, I was in like kindergarten or first grade. We grew lima beans in milk cartons. So we saved our milk carton from lunch and we brought them back and the teacher made holes in it. And then we had to make a decision. We watered them with a tablespoon of water per watering, right? So we gave them good soaking when we first planted them. And some kid would have to water every day. And you watered group 1, got watered every day. So you had a thing of water and a tablespoon. And group 2 got watered every other day. And you got to pick. And I picked every other day. It just seemed like a good idea. And our lima beans did better than the lima beans that got watered every day. And, then we got to take our lima bean home, which is totally pointless as far as what you're going to do with one lima bean plant, right? But the act of doing that, you got to think about this. It was either kindergarten or first grade. I'll be 50 in August. 50. And guess what? I'm telling you the story. Kids form these memories. Even if you don't think it's working, plant that seed and it'll grow in that kid. There's very few things I remember about school. I'd say like high school up, I have memories that are more social and a few things I learned from teachers. Like if your aunt had balls, she'd be your uncle, from my woodshop teacher, Mr. Fox. If I go back to grade school, there's not much I can tell you about, but I can tell you about that. I can tell you about the teacher that one St. Patrick's Day, we made Irish soda bread in the class, right? So we got to make bread and eat it in the same day. I can tell you about the teacher, I know this was first grade, brought in a couple pomegranates and showed us what a pomegranate was and showed us how you open a pomegranate. And then we all got like a few little seeds of pomegranate to taste. And I went home from school that day and started playing in my apartment complex that I was growing up in. And back then, first graders could wander around during the day with their friends, right? You didn't have to be chaperoned everywhere you went, even in first grade. And I remember going, like riding my little bike around the thing and looking at these bushes that I had never seen before in my apartment complex and going, that's a pomegranate bush. And all of a sudden I realized like there were pomegranate bushes all over this apartment complex I lived in. And it had been there forever. And I never saw anybody. And like when I brought it home, like the parents were like, are you sure you can eat that? I'm like, oh, we ate one in school. And I realized there was free food all over my apartment complex. And then I was like, I wonder what else is here. And I found there was like 5 or 6 different, very large plum trees growing in this. It was a huge apartment complex. And it was the adult section where there was no kids allowed, was where all the plum trees were. And I just go over there anyway, climb up the trees and pick plums, right? That all started because somebody exposed me to something. And I think that is such a huge way to get kids involved, is just expose them to it. And this is what you have to do with kids. And this is my advice in general. Don't let your expectations become their goals. So I see it, especially in sports. I see it all the time. The dad talking to his 10-year-old kid about, getting a college scholarship if he's really good at a sport that he has natural talent for. That's your expectation. You had that chance. You either were good enough or you didn't put the effort in, right? If you didn't do it. So you either didn't go to college on a scholarship because you didn't have the talent, or you didn't go to college on a scholarship because you didn't put the effort in. That was your chance. This is their chance. Maybe they're great at baseball. Maybe they enjoy playing baseball. Maybe that's all they want it to be, is just playing baseball in Little League, and they don't want to be bothered otherwise. Don't put your expectations on them. And then take that to everything. When you look at gardening and you're like, I want my kid to be all excited about this thing, they may not be. Some people will never be gardeners. Some people will never care. But I think if you expose them, in time, they'll find the thing that does pull them in. And I'll tell you the one thing you got going for you with gardening and horticulture in general. Humans are horticultural. I think it is natural for us to take care of plants, to plant plants, to appreciate plants, to appreciate their beauty, their nutrition, etc., as it is for us to walk. But if we were born today and we didn't walk, if we all were born and immediately put into basically like electric wheelchairs, and that was done to us for enough generations, you'd show a picture to somebody of people walking and they wouldn't believe it was ever possible. How do we ever move around without these things? And I think that's the separation level we have with gardening and horticulture right now. Next, Kelsey says, can you start spring indoor plants too early? You absolutely can. You probably didn't, but you can. So with tomatoes and peppers, which are the two biggies, and eggplant, you want to be 6 to 8 weeks most of the time, depending on how you're doing it from set out. And if you go much beyond that, you have to get into a pretty big container to keep the plant from stunting. So it has a lot to do with what is the method and what is the container size and what is the overhead size of your, how much room do you have to bring your lights up before the plant is into the lights, right? So if you're starting in solo cups, you can grow a tomato fairly large, but it's still going to hit a point of diminishing returns. So you need to time your starts accordingly. If you've started earlier than you should, it doesn't mean you're going to lose your plants, and it doesn't mean you're going to stunt your plants, but you're probably going to need to pot up to a larger size depending on when you can put plants out. Though we're rapidly approaching the ability to do that in most areas. The other thing you can do if you've gotten into that situation, not only pot up, but get them out of your light-based system, put them out and start hardening them off during the day and leave them in containers. Make sure you water them in the sun, and you're going to have a lot less likelihood of stunting before you go in the ground. And if you're going to have a freeze overnight, and that's why you're not going in the ground yet, just put them in the garage or something and protect them from freezing and then put them back out. That's a pain in the ass. I don't want to do it, but if you end up in that situation, it's the best thing to do. All right. So you can start too early. If you're starting with hydro, especially Kratky hydro, you can really start too early. I tried 4 to 6 weeks for my tomato plants, and in 3 weeks, I had tomato plants that were this big, and they had freaking roots like forever. And they were hard to get out, and it was actually way, way too early. So it depends on what you're doing. Are you doing supplemental heating? That's going to get faster growth rates, et cetera. So you kind of need to figure out, where you're going to draw that line. It can be done. It usually isn't the case. But I'll tell you this, when that plant stops growing, like it reaches capacity of that little bitty cup you have it in, like you put them in a 6-pack and your tomatoes get about that high and they stop, you have a very short period of time to do something before you'll put that plant in the ground. It will live. It will never thrive. Its growth becomes stunted. So there you go. Next up, using and developing a small spring on a property for Mia. That's you got to figure out what you want to do and where the spring's located as to what you can do with it. Me, if I had a spring on a property and it was above a place that I could have an aquatic system, I would run water from the spring through the aquatic system and back out into irrigation or back out into catchment. That would be the number one use I would have for it. The other thing I would do with a spring is I would want to create a battery. So I want to move that into some sort of either a high pond. If we can put a pond in and run water through a pond, we can raise trout in all but the most southern climates, right? But we also have a tank of water. So that spring, if it's only producing a few hundred gallons a day, that's not a ton of water if we want to irrigate a large thing or have large amounts of water for critical needs. Like if we have water up high in the landscape and we can pipe out of that down low in the landscape, we can actually have a lot of pressure for irrigation or things like, if we have a forest fire approaching from that angle, we can probably soak things down and maybe stop it. Sometimes you got to bail, but sometimes you can stay and fight, especially like not some huge giant fire where they've issued an evac order, but one just getting started, like because your stupid ass neighbor sets a fire. Real story. Happened about 4 years ago. My back neighbor near burned the whole place down. Or the same year, some jagoff driving down the road firing freaking firecrackers on the 3rd of July out the window of their car, set the neighbor's grass and our grass on fire along a fence line. And we ran hoses out there and put it out, ran it across the street, had traffic being blocked, and saved the neighbors, because the neighbor's fence was wood from the neighbor's fence from burning down. By the time the fire department got there, the fire was out. If we had waited on them, my whole lawn would have burned, and maybe it would have gotten to my house. I don't know. But my neighbor's fence would have been gone. It would have just completely been gone. So water's an asset. It's really on you what you want to do with something like a spring. And so I think instead of saying, well, what do I do with the spring? We got to go back into permaculture design. What do I want my property to be? Now, what opportunities does a spring have to connect to this system? If I want to do aquaculture, connecting the spring to the pond is obvious. If I want to do gardening, if the spring can provide irrigation, that's obvious, even if I have to use some energy. So let's say I have to run power out to where the spring is, put a little pump in. Little pump is an on-off switch pump, right? And I can do that with automation. And now I run piping up to my garden. I put irrigation in my garden. I don't have to run that pump all the time. I only have to run the pump maybe once a day to irrigate the garden. Now I only need enough capacity in my water battery, my reserve tank, to water the garden once a day during the summer, what have you. Maybe you want to do double the capacity of what you need, so you always have some extra on hand. We can use spring houses to actually create a cool environment to do storage in. There's so many things we can do with a spring. But instead of saying, what do I do with a spring? What do you want to do with your property? Now, how does the spring empower that? That's the way to think about that. Next, using an aerobic spray septic area and safety concerns. Kenny on MeWe. Kenny says, the internet is a freaking junk pile with this. Some people say you can grow cabbages there and let it spray on top of them. You'll be fine. Don't worry about it. Some people say if you grow anything there, you will grow a sewer rat out of your ear and die of rat cancer. And some people say you can do some things, but not others. Okay, here's what I'm going to say. Generally speaking, asking the internet its opinion of a thing is a bad idea, because the problem isn't that you don't get any right answers. The problem is you get a lot of right answers from people who are sure, or wrong answers from people who are sure they're right. And they don't answer questions like this. In my experience, I have observed that this seems to work and it seems to be okay. Or in my opinion, looking at this, I would be concerned about. Those are fine answers. And you get about like 1 out of 100 answers on the internet are fine answers. You get answers like, you'll die, it'll kill you. And they just ignore the fact that half the world freaking irrigates their crops with freaking black water. You can figure out what that is, right? And they don't die. They have more incidences of disease, and I don't recommend it, but you don't instantly die. You get people, for instance, it's one of the places I see it so often is with snakes. Somebody posts a picture of a snake. That's a copperhead. It'll kill you instantly if it bites you. Well, those are two wrong answers. One, it won't kill you instantly if it bites you. There's about, 1 in 1,000 copperhead bites are fatal, even untreated. I'm not saying not to treat it. I'm just saying it's a very low fatality bite. And it's not a copperhead. That's a corn snake, moron. And so you point out that's a red rat snake. That's not a copperhead. And you get called stupid. So I just don't consider the internet the place to get my data about an opinion of a thing, other than can you filter through it? And often it takes more trouble than it's worth to do so. I believe in going to definitive sources. However, this is a place where there isn't a definitive answer. So when we're spraying the liquid part of sewage, we've gone from the solid tank. We've had a massive breakdown in the bad stuff, and we're spraying what should be relatively clear, relatively safe effluent. I still don't want it on my food. Okay, I don't want it on my food. I could care less if it's on the roots of the plant producing my food. So I'm going to say if you're going to grow anything there, you need perennials or high bush growing crops. And it would be better if you can, where you have your spray, to go downgrade of where your spray is, because you're going to get plenty of seep through and plenty of a nutrient flow. And I think you'll be fine. You can also do like small trees and things like that. That's what I would personally do. However, I know people who grow freaking vegetables on aerobic sprayed systems and they don't die. I wouldn't do it. I think you're taking too much risk for too little gain. But if your spray height is, a foot and your food is growing 2 foot and higher, I wouldn't worry too much about it. And then, of course, it would make good practices because I was like, well, what if it's misting and the wind blows and it goes up in the air? What if your hand had balls, right? Wash your freaking food if it comes from a place like that. But overall, I would, the reason so many people worry about this is because some of the best property they have to grow things is where that happens because it's open, because there's no trees. Because you picked an open place to do it, and it's got good solar exposure and what have you. The other thing you can do is raised beds in that area. Now, you don't want to spray into the beds or on the beds, but again, going downgrade, placing raised beds downgrade, you're going to have good subsurface irrigation. So just be creative and don't spray it on something you're going to eat. That's my basic advice, and that's an opinion. I'm not telling you definitively one way or another. You ask my opinion, that's what you get. That's what I've got for today. If you guys have anything for me, all caps is the way to go. I've got 9 items starred. Maybe I'll come back and take a few more. Mr. OG Paint says, I covered my beds with repurposed galvanized roofing and wood to hold them down. Is this acceptable? I'm guessing what he's saying is during his off season, he is taking galvanized roofing, laying it on his beds, and putting some wood on it so they don't blow away to suppress weeds and keep everything nice and cool under there. Yep, no problem. You might find with prices, if you need some roofing, that's an expensive way to do it. But if you have it, it's laying there, you're not doing anything else with it. Literally anything that's not going to destroy itself over time. Like if you had a 4x8 raised bed, it'd be real easy to take a 4x8 piece of plywood and lay it on there. Well, they're 5 times more expensive than they were 2 years ago, and it's going to rot. So I wouldn't take that approach. And you're also going to have certain things in the plywood that are going to leach into the soil. I don't over worry about that, but I wouldn't do that. But metal, tarp, anything that covers it and blocks it out. But this is what I would do. I don't care if you're using a tarp, if you're using corrugated metal, I don't care what it is. If you're going to put your bed to sleep for the winter, great. Use that opportunity. Throw down some chicken feed. Feed the soil life. Maybe throw down a little dry molasses, throw down mulch, and then cap it. Because now when you pull that up, my God, the soil's going to be gorgeous. The other thing you can do is you can do a late season cover crop, let it come up a bit, and then cover it and let it die. That's another way to handle it. Bork says, coffee caffeine substitute for prep, coffee addiction remedy. I don't really know what to advise you with if you're looking for if you're looking to not drink caffeine and have a hot beverage. I'm drinking chamomile tea this morning, a little licorice root, and that's great. But if you want caffeine but not coffee, I'm not really sure what I would recommend other than black tea has about half the caffeine a cup of coffee does. So coffee or tea. I would say the thing is that coffee, if you're talking about it from a prep standpoint, coffee stores wonderfully. Get some green coffee beans, learn to do home roasting, and then store a certain amount of green beans. They store for almost ever if you don't roast them before you put them in the storage. That would be another thing. And then I know Nicole Sauce and Brian Norton are going to have a heart attack when I say this, but if you get even good roasted coffee and store it, your quality will go down, but you're not going to lose caffeine. You can store it. So I don't really know. I mean, you can buy no-dose, I guess, and have caffeine pills. But I think if you have a coffee addiction remedy and you're looking for a caffeine substitute, what you need to do is cure the caffeine addiction. And what I would do personally is cut your coffee consumption to 2 cups a day, and then cut your coffee consumption to 1 cup a day, and then try to wean off completely, and then go back to maybe having a cup or 2 a day. I have about 2 or 3 cups of coffee a day, and I switch to tea. So if you're talking about getting off the addiction, if you're talking about dealing with the addiction because you can't get the coffee, that's a different thing. But if you are addicted to anything, break the addiction. And if you can't use the substance without becoming addicted again, stop using the substance. You have your body. Let's look at caffeine, right? And I don't tell anybody how to live. And I occasionally partake in a little bit of cannabis, right? And I occasionally partake in some alcohol. Some of y'all that come out here to events think all Jack does is drink. Their events. I haven't had a drink in 12 days or something like that right now. So yeah, I don't drink a lot anymore either. But I'm not going to crap on somebody that does. But if you can't not use a substance, the time to break the addiction was yesterday. The next best time is today. And break that addiction. And I don't care what it is. I don't care if you say that it's not even really that harmful. Not being able to do without a substance is not a normal human healthy thing. It's not. I'm sorry. It just isn't. And you shouldn't put yourself in a position where you need a substance to survive. So break the addiction. And caffeine can be a really negative addiction. Caffeine can be pretty harmless, but used in large amounts over time, not so much. So if you have an addiction, break the addiction is my advice. And where I'm going to go with breaking coffee addiction, you'll find there's two types of addictions. Right? I'm sure there's more than two, but basically when it comes to substance, there's two kinds of addictions. There's physical addiction and there's habitual addiction. And a lot of addictions to substances like coffee, even alcohol, if you're not a full-on alcoholic, they're habitual addictions. I'm used to, in the morning when I'm working, having a cup like this in my hand and having something to drink. Now, if you are a regular coffee drinker and you don't drink any coffee this morning, it is not going to be inconceivable that by about noon, you have a migraine that makes you want to drill a hole in your freaking skull with a freaking drill and put ice cubes in it to make it go away. And if that's the case, then having a cup of coffee, and if that goes away, that's your issue, and you need to wean off over time, right? But if you have any addiction to any substance, break the addiction. And if you cannot maintain the addiction broke and use the substance, stop using it. I don't care if it's alcohol. I don't care if it's drugs. I don't care if it's caffeine. I don't care what it is. Because the nutritional requirement of caffeine to keep a human alive and healthy is 0. Now, I think caffeine usage can aid certain things in making us more healthy in moderation. It's not a negative to a neutral. It can be a positive, but only if you can deal with it. Iowa Farm Boy says store-bought water for use in Mead. We have an RO for arsenic. That would be a lot of water from the RO. Not really. Not really. You're making a gallon of Mead at a time, dude. A big batch of Mead's 5 gallons. So, but if you really wanted to, you can use store-bought water for Mead. You can use just about any water for Mead. What I don't like to do in my Mead making is tap water. And it's not that I'm worried there's a poison in it. It's chlorine. Chlorine and chloramines and Mead, there's off-taste things that happen there. But, I mean, you can buy 5 gallons of water from, any grocery store for less than $5, right? And the big gallon jugs. And then you have big gallon jugs you can do other things with. So, sure, no problem. Yeah, I have no problem with that. Could you use that for aerating or refreshing water in a blue drum water storage? Okay, so what are you doing with the water in the blue drum? And I guess he's talking about this solar-powered air pump here. There is no reason whatsoever for you to refresh water at all. Water has an infinite storage life. Unless there's something in the water to go bad, the water doesn't go bad. If you're thinking, hey, if I pump some oxygen into my water before I water my plants, I might get a better growth rate out of my plants, you're correct. You're correct. So if you're thinking that way, yeah, sure you could. It wouldn't hurt. But you know what this would be fantastic for? Aerating compost tea. That's what this would be fantastic for. One little air stone in the bottom of a trash can with this thing sitting on top of it would do a great job of making you some compost tea. Absolutely. Can you fit a hose in it like an airlock or trap? I don't know what the question is there. I'm guessing he's talking about, again, because it came out about the same time as this little pump. Can we take and put some sort of air hose, breather hose, and then that goes outside of a place this is protected? Yeah, but again, we need the panel to be able to get sunlight. And if it doesn't get sunlight, it's going to die. And if we put it in a place where it can get sunlight and it's contained, it's going to cook the inner workings of the pump and the batteries. So again, I think choosing this particular model was a mistake, but I'm willing to risk the $30 it cost and go with an upside down mounting methodology with some sort of overhang to protect it from being completely drenched and a little bit of silicone. And that might work. We'll see. But yeah. Do you trust chickadee doo-doo? Do I trust chicken manure? I guess. I trust composted chicken manure. And I'm going to be honest with you. I do not worry that if I put chicken manure in my garden that I'm going to get sick, especially with mulch and soil organisms being healthy and everything. No, the problem is that chicken manure is a hot manure, and it's so high in nitrogen that it can burn the roots of plants, and it's detrimental to their growth if we're using it fresh. Composted, I have no problem whatsoever. Mark said, is sawdust usable as mulch? I have access to hardwood sawdust. Yeah, but the problem is it's so fine that it packs and it forms like a paste. Think about what do we make paper out of? It's softwoods usually, but we make it out of wood. Sawdust to me is better as a compost amendment or a soil amendment. It's not the greatest mulch, depending. Sometimes people say sawdust and they mean dust, right? Sometimes people say sawdust and it's like little chunks, little chips, like bigger chips of wood. That's a little bit easier to use as a mulch. Or if we mix it. So now we don't want to mix it with we have a carbon. We put nitrogen and carbon together. We kick off the composting process when it gets wet and we bake our plants and burn their roots. We don't want to do that. But if we had a mix of sawdust and chopped leaf mulch, right? It's a much better mulch. And are we mulching a big garden or a flower pot? If we're mulching a flower pot, a little leaf mulch and a little bit of sawdust together, that'd probably be pretty good. But if I had a massive amount of sawdust available, I would be using it more as a compost element, and I would be mulching with the compost. That's personally how I would view that one, just because of the way it can kind of mesh together, and we don't really want that. Morning glory control, is it possible? So there's two types of morning glories in the world. Well, there's lots of them, but there's two main types of morning glories. One are wild morning glory, and two are the ones we plant. The ones we plant, don't plant them where you don't want them. Wild morning glory, it will just keep coming back. All you can do is cut it. But control, if you keep cutting anything, eventually it dies. So kind of the thing to do is let it grow up a couple foot and then cut it off of the ground. Let it grow up a couple foot, cut it off of the ground. Let it keep drawing from the battery and don't give it enough growth to start recharging. And just about anything can be killed over time with that. And then Hopper Woo says living teepee. And I think we're talking about kids. So building a teepee and planting things like beans or any kind of vine crop up that teepee and make the teepee big enough the kid can get inside of it. That'll get them interested in the garden. I've seen that done a lot, and kids do seem to really love doing that. I'm going to come back here and see if we have any more all cap stuff for me. I'm not even reading it, so if you didn't follow all caps, nice tip from an other channel. Empty mason jars take up the same amount of space filled with drinking water. That's true. That's true. You want to store water, fill all your empty jars with water because they don't take up any more space. George says, any advice on raising mealworms to feed chickens and sell to others? Our experience in raising mealworms, and my wife tried it, and she followed all the directions on the internet. And she got these drawer systems, where like these Tupperware drawers, and you sort the worms and you feed them oatmeal. It's not worth it. At home scale, it's not worth it. That you need to go major scale to make raising mealworms worth it, especially if you're going to feed them to chickens. What we determined is if you owned a few lizards and you were buying your mealworms for your lizards, that what we were doing was totally worth it. Feeding it to poultry. It was less expensive to buy a 5-pound bag of dehydrated mealworms than to raise mealworms. If I was going to do anything like that, I would probably move to something like black soldier fly. All right, I think that's the only one we had there while I was going on and answering other questions. Okay, here's one. Mike says, do you swim in your big Miyagi? I do not. And I don't do it because I don't think it's safe. I don't do it because it's not practical. The way I've built it, it's steep. You have to go up and over. You're risking the liner in that design. Plus, I have plant shelving and it's made out of ceramic tile all the way around the perimeter. There's no good in and out location. And I have a pool. You could certainly have a pool conversion and swim in it. My buddy David has an in-ground swimming pool. He's converted it to a pond. His kid swims in it all the time. Crystal said, could you do aquaponics with a smaller aquarium fish, or am I just crazy? You're not crazy, but you're not going to. Okay, so I've talked about this before. Aquaponics is an overstocked system by design. So when we do true aquaponics, where we're getting enough nutrient to grow plants from fish, we need to overstock the system. So I've seen some pretty cool indoor aquaponics system using a fish tank. And you can certainly do aquaponics with fish that you're not trying to eat, like goldfish. And they produce a lot of waste. They don't really have a stomach, goldfish. You kind of feed them, they eat, and they process waste. Right? So they're a great fish species for aquaponics. But if you're talking like little guppies and stuff like that, you need a lot of them, or you need to grow low nutrient requirement plants. So your greens like lettuces and stuff like that will generally do pretty well, even in a kind of slightly understocked system. But if you want to grow peppers and tomatoes and stuff like that, no, that's probably not going to work for you. With that, I hope you guys enjoyed today's show. It was fun talking to you. I don't know. I felt my timing was a little bit off today at some points, but I guess that's to be expected with the amount of work I've been doing lately. Thanks for bearing with me where I had a few hem-haw moments and some things I had to think about before I talked. And I appreciate you guys. It is Friday. We've wrapped up a week. I've kept my word to you. I haven't said anything about the situation in the world this week other than where it was required for the Expert Council show. We've been all on solutions this week. Next week, we are going to take a look at more solutions, but we're also going to take a look at some of the bad stuff that's going on and what it means for us. I have not decided fully yet, but I am thinking about titling Monday's show, The Enemy Within. I think there's never been a time in history for America where we have been more worried about the enemy outside of us incorrectly. Our problems are of our own making. When I say our own making, I don't mean just you and me. I mean you and me that think we get wrapped up in the world sometimes in ways that we shouldn't, instead of staying on the solutions like we did this week. But the vast majority of people plugged into the matrix, the average idiot, Bonhoeffer's theory of stupidity I covered with you last week, just everywhere. The average idiot, the government, bureaucracy, the technocracy, the kleptocracy, all of it. We're so worried about Vladimir Putin. I honestly see my own government as far bigger a threat to my way of life and my freedom than I see Vladimir Putin right now. That doesn't mean Putin's a good guy. That doesn't mean what he's doing in Ukraine isn't a freaking war crime. It just means he's not Vladimir Putin's not the one taking my freaking content off the internet. Vladimir Putin's not the one running the United States economically into the ground. Vladimir Putin is not the person that shut down our own domestic energy production with no real plan of how to replace it. Like, Putin didn't cause all this shit. We did. Vladimir Putin didn't lock Americans in their home for 2 years. Vladimir Putin didn't threaten people's jobs if they didn't get an injection. Right? Vladimir Putin didn't censor Hunter Biden's laptop story and say it was Russian disinformation. The United States media did that. When you look at all of the ways of our lives that have changed, and this is what I said recently, we were told from the very beginning of the Afghan and Iraq wars, Gulf War II and the Afghanistan war, the soldiers that were sent overseas were fighting for our freedom. Fighting for our freedom. We're fighting for our freedom. Okay, great. So are you more or less free than you were in the year 2000 in America today? Are there more or less regulations? Are there more or less interferences on your life? Are you more or less free? So and I think anybody with a brain, anybody with an IQ above 85 and a functioning freaking brain would say, oh, we're less free. So either you were lied to or we lost or both. You can take your pick from those three, but those are your only three options. You're lied to. It was never about your freedom. Option A, you should probably pick that one. We tried real hard, but we lost. And we lost because if we're fighting for freedom and we have less freedom 20 years later, we lost, right? And then, maybe it's a combination. We lost and it was a lie at the same time. And we've certainly lost a lot. When I look at the plight of the American farmer, it's nothing that anybody in Europe or Mexico or Canada, let alone Russia, did that's causing American farmers to suffer, especially small farmers. When I look at the average person trying to set up a small business and being shut down by regulations, it's nothing that any other country did. So I'm really thinking that we're going to take a look at the enemy within on Monday. But instead of just looking at it, what do we do? What do we do? How do we combat it? And I think, I want to thank John Willis at Original SOE Gear, SOE Tactical Gear, for sending me this. Give me liberty or I'll get it myself. And there's an implication here, right? There's a strong Second Amendment implication with this image that goes along with this. But there's two ways to use a rifle: offensively and defensively. Offensively and defensively. And I'm a big proponent of offense. I'm a big proponent of defense when it comes to the rifle. Said that wrong. I'm probably on another list now. I wonder what list I'm not on. But I'm a big proponent of defense when it comes to the rifle. So the rifle is the last resort. I'm going to build my farm. I'm going to build my business. I'm going to educate my fellow Americans. I'm going to put together the best, period, small-scale aquatics course that's ever been developed. And I'm going to sell it. And I'm going to make money. And I'm not going to apologize for it. And I'm going to do good things in my life and in my family's life with it. But I'm going to empower thousands of freaking people to grow their own food and enact a sedition. That's the kind of stuff we do about it, because you either give me liberty or I'll take it myself. And there's more than one way to do that. Anyway, if you want to check out SOE Tactical Gear, there'll be a link in the show notes there. You want to get some of these cool shirts John always sends me. Be great to do. John supported this show from the very beginning. He's a big part of our success. He made his employees listen to it when we had like 100 listeners. And I think they still listen to it at the shop to this day at times. So definitely check that out. And if there's enough interest Monday, the enemy within, what do you guys think? Let me know. And in the comments, since we're going to shut down now. And I appreciate you guys. And I will be back Monday with something for you.